So that's how our day looks, and now the lovely Natalie Lyons is going to come up.
Lovely. Good morning. How y'all doing this morning? Good, good. Well, my name is Natalie Lyons, and I am the Center Director for the National Child Welfare Resource Center for Adoption. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you our third general session entitled Leadership and Cultural Competency to Achieve System and Cultural Change. And some of you might be aware that one of our NRC for Adoption's training and technical assistance priorities is cultural competence and helping states with cultural competence and providing culturally responsive services. So we're very, very excited that we're going to have this general session for you. Also, we are in the fourth year of our Minority Adoption Leadership Development Institute, which we affectionately call the MALDI, whose goal really is to enhance the leadership capacities. Hello? Photo op, paparazzi. Okay. Which is to enhance the leadership capacities of emerging minority leaders from across the country. So Dr. James Mason is here with us, and he's actually one of our MALDI faculty, so we're really happy about this session and happy that he's here with us. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Mason. You can come on up if you want to. Dr. James Mason is the Manager of Diversity, Education, and Cultural Competence for the Providence Health System's Oregon region. He is also the Senior Project Consultant for the National Center on Cultural Competence at Georgetown University. He is the former Director of Multicultural Health for the state of Oregon and has worked as an administrator, researcher, and educator since 1977. Dr. Mason has also engaged in service delivery systems research, including directing 2 national research projects focusing on the development and measurement of cultural competence in professionals and organizations. He has applied the cultural competence concept to a variety of service and academic disciplines, including public health, emergency preparedness, urban and regional planning, behavioral health, mental health, education, child welfare, and alcohol and drug treatment services. He has lectured and consulted with human service agencies across the U.S., Canada, and Latin America since 1984. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to bring to you Dr. James Mason.
Good morning, everyone. I get embarrassed every time I hear that biography. I wrote it, though, so I guess I shouldn't. My mom really loves it. Want to thank Natalie for the real warm welcome. Want to thank the staff for the real warm welcome. I think this is the third or fourth time I've been here. Or more. And every time I think it's going to be my last, they call me and I come back, and it's always a real pleasure, for a couple of reasons. One is I got my start in child welfare probably, I think back in 76 or 77 or back a long time ago. I was young, I was fresh out of school. I'd read a lot of books, hadn't had any kids, hadn't been brokenhearted, hadn't been married. And I was telling families how to raise children, how to be families. And one of the things I learned was the power of involving families. I was very, very fortunate as a young professional. I had a lot of people take me under their wing. I remember one mom asked me one day, James, do you have any kids? And I was like, no, I don't have any of my own, but I have a bunch on my caseload that I love like my own. I have my own kids now. I often joke and say 3 for $5, but I have my own kids now. And I truly, truly love my own. And when I think back to the old days and how insensitive I was to a large extent, and how unaware I was to what it is to be a family, what it is to be an adoptive family, what it is to be a foster family. Truly, truly humbled. So it's a real honor and a treat to see the extent to which we're involving families and how we make decisions, how we learn. I think it's probably the biggest untapped resource around this whole diversity equation. And that's what I'm here to talk about a little bit today, is about diversity, about leadership, and I hope we have some fun with it. After dealing with it for at least the last 23, 25 years, still find it a terribly difficult subject to talk about. Always wondering who I'm going to offend. And I remember when we developed the cultural competence model about 25 years ago, and we were going around the country talking about it, people would feel, you know, after you get done, they say, oh God, I feel so sad, I feel so ashamed, I feel so guilty, I feel so bad. And then we're saying, well, I didn't do this so that people would feel bad. In fact, I'm big enough, if I wanted people to feel bad, I could do that all day long. And so I kind of softened the message, and the response was, wow, that was so nice, that was so light, that was so easy. And quite frankly, I don't think dealing with diversity is necessarily going to be an easy job. So I've gotten back to being mean and evil, and what I try to do is I try to offend everyone up front and get it off my back. And I think to a large extent that if we're born in Western civilization, if we're born in the U.S., all of us have issues of race, sexuality, gender, religion, diversity to deal with, irrespective of what we are. And often I say just because one is doesn't mean one is. As an African American, I could be another African American's best friend and worst dang nightmare. And what becomes rather evident is who can do this work will surprise you. And over having taught for the last 25 years, and most of my students in Oregon have been of European descent, been very, very impressed with who can do this work. What's interesting is coming to D.C., it's always a treat as well. The Beltway is always a treat. I talked about being in Oregon. I think we have upwards to 50,000, 55,000 African Americans in our state now. So they miss me. I do have to get back this afternoon. So let's have a little fun with it this morning. And as I talk, don't feel worried about when you interject or interrupt or disagree or what have you. Let's seriously have fun with it, and let's do this. When I talk about cultural competence leadership, I'm not just talking for managers, administrators, or people at the top. Everyone can learn to lead by discovering the power that lies within each one of us to make a difference and being prepared to make the call, being prepared when the call to lead comes. I say that just to say that when I think about people who I've seen as leaders in the field, they haven't always had the PhDs, the initials behind their names. They haven't always had the distinguished titles. I mentioned families. Families have taught me a lot. I've seen a lot of leadership come from families. I've also seen leadership come from various levels of the food chain of any organization. So when we think about leadership, we're not talking necessarily about management, not talking about necessarily administration. We're talking about one's ability to think, one's ability to problem solve, one's ability to move things forward. So we all can be leaders. And I must give, this quote actually comes from, and this is no political thing whatsoever, I just appreciated his work on leadership, but it comes from Colin Powell, whose name has been in the press a lot lately. But I'm not endorsing anything or anyone. I need to work in this country, so I'm totally nonpartisan. And I don't think I have a spine at all. Let me see. No spine at all. The other thing that I would suggest is, as we think about diversity, there's some questions that we ask ourselves. One of the questions, it seems rather simple, but it's actually kind of complex. What culturally diverse groups are we serving? And when I say culturally diverse, what I want us to understand that we all have cultures. We don't want to just see culture when we see race or ethnicity. We want to understand, even as European Americans, we have a culture as well. What drives your diversity efforts? Wherever you are, you perhaps can become or already are a leader in diversity, cultural competence, difference. You're going to need rhetoric, rationale that you can take up the food chain and down the food chain. How do you explain it to a legislature? How do you explain it to a governor? How do you explain it to someone in the neighborhood who doesn't want to hear it? What are your cross-cultural comforts and discomforts? What spooks you? What unnerves you? I often hear people say they treat everyone the same. No, you don't, nor should you. I work in healthcare now. We can think of a 14-year-old. We can think of her 64-year-old grandmother. One's at risk of pregnancy. You be the judge. What are the cultural barriers or issues we face in providing quality services? And how do those vary by group? And ultimately, what types of linkages and contacts do we have? I mentioned coming from academia, and I spent a large part of my adult life as an educator, which meant any other educators in the room? Okay, we can talk about them, I think. I get to work around 9-ish or so, and if I wasn't teaching that day, and I could run to the library, grab 3 or 4 books, and come back to my office, read for 3 or 4 hours. Whew, rough day. I think I can get home around 2 or so. I'd often have my friends who would call me with kind of a TA question, technical assistance question, and wonder about a problem. And I say, have you read so-and-so? Have you read this book? Have you read that book? And most of my friends who have real jobs, who have real lives, don't have the luxury of reading 3 or 4 hours a day and packing it in, right? So I say this to say that I still endorse the literature, I still endorse research, I still endorse libraries and things of that nature, like never before. But I also talk about creating what I call a Rolodex on steroids. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure that you have linkages and contacts in the world that can help you understand what's going on here. I'll talk about this as we go forward. My kids are older now. My youngest just graduated from high school, so I got 3 kids in college, so they really are 3 for $5 at this point in my life. But what I would suggest is that young people have been among my greatest resources in helping me understand young people. In fact is, my youngest, who just graduated, who's 17 still, who teaches me the most about him is this 19-year-old friend around the corner. In fact is, when I want the 17-year-old to clean his room, I don't tell him anymore. I pay the 19-year-old kid around the corner to come tell Jordan, clean your room. You'd be really cool if you did. I say that to say that when we think of the work we do, unfortunately, we simply won't learn enough or know enough in our lifetime to deal with all the diversity that we're going to encounter. What's going to be important for us is, can we pick up the phone and wonder why someone just yelled at us, why someone just gave us a bad time, and what have you. Years and years and years ago, when I was a student, me and another student had to host a faculty event. And you know, when you're young and you don't know what to wear and you don't have very many clothes, and you ask one of the faculty, well, what should we wear tomorrow? And they give you that adult response, you should wear what you think is appropriate. Well, in my closet, I only got 3 things to wear. I don't know if any of them are appropriate, but I'll wear one of those. And we came to work the next day, and I saw a woman I work with, and I said, you look nice today. And she said, that's the worst thing you could say to me, and she stormed off. I'm like, wow, that wasn't too cool. And I was kind of stunned, and then I thought about it, I said, well, she doesn't know me very well, because that's not the worst thing I could have said to her. But I, anguish over the next few days about what I'd done and how I'd hurt her feelings and what happened. And I talked to several women friends of mine and said, James, it probably wasn't you. It might have been what you represent. You are a guy. A guy may have approached her wrong in the past, and so it may not be you. I say the same thing to you. There are going to be times when you put your best foot forward or extend the olive branch, and it's you get a negative response. It may not be you. It may be what you represent as an adult, as a professional, from the discipline, what have you. I was saved by having a bunch of female colleagues that could help me understand how I'd hurt someone. And what I've learned, so if I don't tell you look nice today, it's nothing personal. I just don't do that anymore. You probably do look nice today, but I'll never be the one to tell you. The other thing I would suggest is that we need to learn to share our cross-cultural success stories. What we tend to share in the workplace is what's wrong. None of them speak English. They never answer the phone. They're always late. They all have pit bulls. They never answer the doorbell. We know all that stuff, right? What we tend not to know are the success stories. And what we want to find a way of sharing is what's good. Most of what we've learned about diversity is what's called the deficit model. We know what's wrong. We know how they suck. Well, we tend not to know what's right with them. We need to look for resiliency and share that. We need to look for strengths and share that. The cultural competence is very little more than a strengths model. What's right and how can we build upon that? So when we share our successes, what we begin to wonder is why they happen, how we replicate them, so that our buddies don't have to learn the same hard way that we did. When we think of cultural competence, a very literal concept, it's a state of being capable of functioning effectively in the context of cultural differences. That's what it is for individuals. For an organization, it's a set of practice, skills, policies, attitudes, and structures which come together in a system, enabling that system to work, again, effectively amongst diverse individuals, or professionals, or communities. Nothing terribly highfalutin about that. The other thing that I would suggest to you that's emerging is this notion of linguistic competence. That's the ability to work across linguistic differences. We're a much more linguistically diverse country than we were years ago, and you might see linguistic differences occur in various parts of the U.S. and of the world. And when I speak about this, I'm also talking about the linguistic differences of speaking adult language versus speaking teen language. I'll talk about that as we go forward. So learning to use learning to use interpreters becomes important. Learning to make sure that the language that we craft or that we use is going to work with the populations we serve. Writing for academics, for example, is very different than writing for normal people, even normal academics. Writing for adults is very different than writing for young people. I just say that we need to become more sophisticated, and among the greatest resource to assure that we are writing and speaking correctly are our families, are our former families, are their children. So I say with linguistic competence, just understanding that as a country we're beginning to recognize that we're fairly monolingual, we're becoming more multilingual, and we don't want to get caught behind that linguistic eight ball, if you will. I would also suggest that when we think of cultural competence, it's a very forgiving concept. Wherever you are today is immaterial. Where you are tomorrow is much more relevant. So when we look at this continuum, it ranges from cultural destructiveness to cultural proficiency. When we think of cultural destructiveness, it's more of an ideal concept. It's more of a archetype. It does have components such as the boarding school movement with Native Americans, some would argue English only, things of that nature. When we think of cultural proficiency, becoming expert in a culture, quite frankly, no one ever really gets there. Again, it's an archetype as well. Our goal is to move as fast as we can and as often as we can with as many populations toward the positive end of the spectrum. And what we're going to find is that we're going to vary with respect to our knowledge by group and by subgroup. So you don't want to hold yourself hostage to the fact that you don't know. Quite frankly, you weren't ever exposed. What we were exposed to are things such as, we know 2 + 2, so you should know that. We know how to spell cat, we should know that. What we weren't exposed to is how to work with diverse populations. So don't take a whole lot of time beating yourself up. You simply weren't exposed to that. I'll give you a quick example. We've all heard, have anyone heard of the Wright brothers, aviation guys? Has anyone heard of the Wright sister? The Wright sister was the one who made the planes for the wings for their planes. She took care of them until they were about in their 40s. She cooked for them, sewed for them, and in her 40s she found a partner, a male, and she married, and they dissed her big time because they thought she existed to take care of them. And I have a daughter, and my dad was in aviation, and I was in aviation, and what was interesting is having very, very few role models. My daughter's black, by the way. Thought I'd throw that in. Very, very few role models for African-American females around aviation. Very, very few role models around females in aviation. And I didn't learn about the Wright sister until about a couple of years ago on NPR. And I just say that to say that if we're raising daughters, if we are adopting or fostering daughters, making sure that we have images in front of them that help them understand that anyone can fly the plane, it isn't only men. Anyone can make the incision, it isn't only men. We still do gender roles around career planning for young people. And my daughter, I love as much as I love my boys. Again, all 3 for $5, but still I love them all the same. I say that just to say that we are behind the 8 ball around gender and preparing women for a very positive future. And we think of cultural competence, it's an area where we all need to grow. Now, one of the things I would suggest arming you with, and this is going to be important, is why do cultural competence? And I want to try to get us away from the warm and fuzzies. Even though the warm and fuzzies resonate with me, they won't always resonate with your funders. They won't always resonate with your legislature. They may not resonate with your city councils and other leaders. So the reason we deal with cultural diversity, the reason we deal with cultural competence needs to be part of something we have in our ammunition kit. But one of the things is that we are rapidly diversifying demographically and in terms of our belief systems, even around something as mundane as how we define family. I was trained to understand family as a biological entity, a biological mom, biological dad, and 1.5 children, so to speak. In my own life, what I began to realize was that I had play mothers, play brothers, play dads, play sisters, and that as a child welfare practitioner, one of the ways that I began to make families stronger was help them understand that you had the biological entity for sure, but you can begin to acquire play mothers, play brothers, play sisters, play kids, a whole bit, as a way of making ourselves stronger. The play moms that I had were of various diverse backgrounds because my mom was a nurse and worked in a very diverse clinic. What it meant was also having play adults in my neighborhood. What it meant was who could yell at me was very, very diverse. I grew up in a neighborhood back in the day that if you walked too far and you did something wrong, you weren't necessarily assured that a phone call wouldn't beat you home. And if you got home and said, well, she's lying, you got jacked again because, so you might get jacked in the neighborhood, you might get jacked at home around bad behavior. I just say that to say that one of the things we need to get back to is understanding that all the kids in our neighborhood are ours. We need to speak up when we see any of them at risk. It's difficult, but we need to do that again. And I say that's part of a diverse belief system is around how we define families. I'll give you another example of how diverse we are. This is called the cold exercise, and we can do this from our chairs. I want you to think of when you were young. Had a cold or flu. Anybody have cold or flu as a kid? How was it dealt with in your family? You better remember having cold or flu. How was it dealt with in your family? Cold or flu? How was it treated? Vicks Vapor Rub. I come from Vicks family. We got Vicks in the nose, Vicks in the mouth, Vicks on the back, Vicks on the chest. My dad would throw us in the bed. We'd slide on the other side. What else do we? Well, we were shiny as all get out. What else do we do besides Vicks? Hot toddy, with or without alcohol? Wrong answer, but probably the right answer. What else do we do? Cold or flu? Chicken noodle soup, classic. What else do we do? Lots of attention. TLC made it a whole lot better. What else do we do? Crackers and warm milk. That's something that we did. What else did we do? Wrap you up in a blanket and hold you. That's good too. Anything else come to mind? Yes, ma'am, in the back. Lay on the living room couch and watch TV. Life is good. We're getting better. What else do we do? Isolated the child. That's something I've heard that as well. And I saw your hand, ma'am. Flat soda. I've heard of milk toast, which might be the crackers and thing I heard earlier. I've heard of warm jello, garlic around the neck, acidity around the neck, camphor on a rag worn around the neck. Some of my very traditional native friends will boil the heads of fish and drink the broth. Southeast Asian, the coining or rubbing with a thumbnail or coin. Prayer, believe it or not. Nothing, believe it or not. What's the right way? We survived it all. We survived it all. Right. A week to 10 days. In fact, when I was growing up, the remedy of choice was aspirin, which we don't do anymore. I say this just to say that in a room that I would argue appears to be predominantly mainstream people, if I pushed you hard, we'd find 75 different responses to a common ailment, the cold. What a lot of stuff is stuff that's handed down intergenerationally. It reflects our culture. What's interesting from a medical standpoint is all of it's about equally therapeutic, very little therapeutic value. I know that Vicks shouldn't work. My kids got sick. They got Vicksed up like anybody else. I know it shouldn't work. I still Vicks myself up, throw myself in the bed, slide off on the other side. This stuff has become comfort food to a large extent. And so when we think of our diverse belief systems, they are very widespread. They occur around family, around things as mundane as a cold or flu. And what I'm suggesting is networks like these. So while you're here, exchange cards, exchange information, broaden your network so that you have many more remedies to very common ailments. Disparate service outcomes. In mental health, we had disparities. In public health, we have disparities. Child welfare, we have disparities. Education, we have achievement gap. Something we're still dealing with as a society. From the private sector, we deal with issues of market share. The public sector, utilization, making sure people use our services. We can look at our inadequate or formal and informal learning. I grew up on Disney. My kids grew up on Disney. I didn't really realize, and I'm not going to knock Disney because Disney is great, by the way. But one of the things I remember reading Rapunzel to my kids back in the day, and Rapunzel was a lady who lived in the tower, and as Disney women are wont to do, she loved the prince. She had the serious hair. What I didn't remember about the book and about the story was that Rapunzel made the prince this serious suit. In the book that I had, the suit was blue, had epaulets, had brass buttons. He was all pimped out. And he rejected her, and I'm like, wow, that's kind of deep. And another page, there was this big old spread she made for him, all this food, and I like food. And he rejected her again. I looked at my daughter, and I flung the book across the room and said, no, Nia, not for any man. And but I began to think of how my hard drive was configured around gender issues, around class issues, around rural-urban issues, around disability, things of that nature. So when we think about how we were trained, and what I'm trying to do is get you off the hook of the diversity thing, is that very few of us were trained to deal with diversity. In fact, we were trained very much in the opposite. So we have to overcome a lot of our informal and formal learning around who should be at the table and what have you, including the issue around involving consumers. I come from mental health as well as a practitioner, and it was an area where we had a real hard road to hoe around involving consumers. And the fact is, families in many instances were seen as a pathogenic agent for child behavioral problems. Families were seen as the cause of problems. Even though you might have 3 or 4 kids, 3 do well, 1 doesn't do well, we blame a family. And the fact is, we also were trained as practitioners to provide child and family therapy to a child without informing a parent, which is essentially using an adult service delivery model and imposing it on a child. So we have a lot to overcome in that respect. Accreditation, funding, and licensure is another reason. Inter and intergroup conflict, making sure that we can help mediate conflicts. Understanding chronic and disproportionate poverty. Historic underrepresentation of diverse people, family members at decision policy-making bodies. Liability, malpractice, legal and civil rights issues. I give you this list and just as something you can begin to mull over as why we attended this issue. I want to also suggest the importance of a diverse workforce. And I've been impressed with the National Resource Center's diversity. I've been impressed with its concern for diversity, and probably that's one of the compelling things that gets me coming back. But one of the things that we found about a diverse workforce is that having a diverse workforce is easy to create and maintain a diverse workforce. Having a diverse workforce is more efficient and saves cost. One of the problems that we have when we don't have a diverse workforce is that we have high turnover. No one wants to be the only one, the first one, whether it be of color, whether it be a woman, whether it be gay or lesbian, whether it be someone of disability. For many, many years, I was, where I worked, I was the only one. I was the only African American at the Research Institute at the Graduate School of Social Work. And kind of tough at times. I remember really being tough during the first OJ era. I'd come to work and it'd be Monday and people would look at me and say, "Oh my God, we're so glad you're here because you're the only one we can ask." And I'm like, "Oh, really?" And I'd get this OJ question, and it'd be kind of a convoluted OJ question. I'm like, "Wow, that's interesting," and I wouldn't have any idea, but I'm black, so I figured they needed a response, and I'd make up something, and they'd look at me and say, "Wow, that is so deep." I said, "Yeah, I know." I say, now help me now. Thinking of white people, why did Jeffrey Dahmer eat those folks? And my white friends would get so embarrassed, they'd turn all red, and they would say, "Why are you asking me this?" And that'd be my point exactly. I'm not allowed to speak for the 5 immediate black members of my family, let alone the 45 million blacks in the U.S. But I say that to say that we want to get beyond the only one syndrome. We want to reach critical mass in how our workforce shapes up. Because what we know is that when we bring someone in, we lose them. We spend about 1/3 of their salary rehiring them, right? And often we push people away with disabilities very inadvertently, people of color very inadvertently, women very inadvertently, sexual minorities inadvertently, people of different ages inadvertently. That's a cost to us. Resource acquisition and development. By having diverse people in our workforce, they see things that we may not see. We know that they're historically underemployed. We also know that by having a diverse workforce, we're more creative and more productive. We're also more likely to identify problems in a different way or solve problems. We also will often, in many cases, have a heightened appeal to our workforce. I'll give you a classic example. In the 60s, as women began to enter the workforce, we did this thing called flex time, because in many cases, women were still responsible for getting kids to school and picking them up, by default, if nothing else. Many smart employers flex their schedules to accommodate bringing this talent into the workforce. Well, guys started to say, "You know what, I want to avoid the rush, the traffic coming to work. I want to get off early enough to go see my kid play in Little League. I want to drive my kid to school so I can hug him and kiss him in the morning." So as we developed this notion of flex time for women, we began to realize it has implication for men and anyone in the workplace. So when we think of a diversified workforce, we aren't diversifying the workforce for diverse people necessarily. We're doing it for ourselves. And ultimately what we find is as we embark on this diversity path, it's in our best interest, whatever we are. Organizational growth and marketability. If you plan to work in the 21st century, you want to be effective in the 21st century, you do it. And like I said, last bullet on this is around social responsibility, social justice, things of that nature, warm and fuzzy. If they work for you, fine. They may not always work for everyone. What you need as a leader in diversity, as a leader in cultural competence, is a rhetoric, is a rationale as to why I do this, and how I talk this up the food chain and down the food chain. In the corporate world, we talk about it as a business imperative. Something you want to be very careful about as you talk to consumers and family members. You don't want to say that you are dealing with issues of diversity because of business. That sounds rather mercenary. So we want to tailor our argument for our audience to a large extent, if that makes any sense to you. Now, those of you as professionals and those of you who might consume training or attend training recognize that there's several different dimensions of training. Often we talk about diversity training and not be very discerning in what we mean. One of the areas I would urge all of us to consider dealing with is what's called anti-bias, anti-discrimination training. Just helping us understand who spooks us. When I was young, I remember we would ride the bus and I would see people with disabilities, and I was very afraid of people with disabilities. I didn't know why. I began to find out as I got older that when I went to school, the kids with disabilities were never in my part of the school. They were, there was a fence between us. We never came on the same school bus. I became afraid of them. My kids, on the other hand, are modern kids, I would argue. They have kids in their class with disabilities, kids with soundboards, kids with wheelchairs. And what's so cool is when I go to visit, when I went to visit, is to watch how they tease the kids with disabilities as they would any other kid. If someone from outside their classroom came to tease this kid, it wasn't always cool because this is our buddy, and be very careful how you joke with our buddy. I say that just to say that I was afraid of people with disabilities, and when I began to work with children with special health care needs, I didn't know whether to hug them, to not hug them, to look at them, to not look at them. So understand that we all have biases. We may not always be aware of them, but we all have biases around things such as race, around ability, around age, around language, around gender, around sexuality. That's how we're configured, and I would just urge us to get in touch with that. For those of us who might aspire to management, administrative careers, learning to manage a diverse workforce is also important. For those of us as foster or adoptive parents who have diverse kids, learning to manage that diversity is also critical. So as I talk about these issues, don't think of them just that this is only for the diverse or only for us as non-diverse. This is for all of us. Understand, as I said earlier, as an African American, I went to the same schools as my white colleagues did. I got exposed to the same curriculum. I got exposed to the same TV shows. Whereas as a white person, I might have to deal with issues of racism. As a person of color, I have to deal with issues of internalized racism. As a male, I have to deal with issues of sexism. As a woman, we might have to deal with issues of internalized sexism. As a hetero, I have to deal with issues of homophobia. As a person of same-sex orientation, I might have to deal with issues of internalized homophobia. So understand when I talk about this stuff, it's something that we all are dealing with. Cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity. Making sure that we know the diverse groups in terms of their strengths or resiliencies, what's good about them. Do we know, I'll give you an example. Has anyone ever taken a history of black studies course? How many of you remember Benjamin Banneker and what he did? What did Benjamin Banneker do? Hands went down. First clock in America, laid out the city of D.C. A lot of us forget. Anybody ever heard the name of Benjamin Franklin? Yeah. I would say that Benjamin Franklin is etched on our hard drive. Benjamin Banneker isn't. So when I talk about cultural awareness, understand that we still need to do the black histories and black studies course, and native histories, and women's histories, and disability histories, all those kind of things, because that's the stuff we don't get. And if we're trying to raise strong children, strong families, we want to make sure that we expose our kids to what they can really be. Not that they can just be rappers, or dancers, or singers, or athletes, but they can cover the waterfront. And quite frankly, and sadly, what they will get exposed to in their public education may not be what we need to inure them to the strains and tribulations of growing up today. I think it's much tougher raising children today than when I grew up. What they're exposed to, what they're vulnerable. And like I said, I grew up in a very tough neighborhood, but I had a lot of resources. I mentioned cultural and linguistic competence as a training area. Another area is cross-cultural conflict management, and another area is intercultural communication. When I think of intercultural communication, I don't want us to only think of that between different cultural groups. It can happen with people that are very similar. Frictions that happen. There's a woman I worked with for many, many years, dear friend. I remember one day I came to work and she looked up at me and she said, I asked her how was her weekend, and Marilyn said, well, we got off of work at Friday at 5 and we went to a movie that evening. Then we went to dinner. Saturday morning we got up and we gardened and we took the animals to the vet and we went and bought some flowers. And then we got home and we painted the kitchen and we ate dinner and just watched TV. Oh, we saw a great TV show. Sunday morning we got up And this went on and on and on. And I'm like, oh, I was just asking how was your weekend? And so she turned to me and said, what did you guys do this weekend? I said, we didn't do much. Talked to you later, walked off. She looks at me now and thinks I'm really anal. I look at her and think she has no boundaries. She sees me coming. She avoids me. I see her. I avoid her. We just got issues that way. I have another person, another dear friend of mine. She sees a problem. She wants to jump on it right now, fix it right now today. Let's fix it. Let's do this. Let's get on it. I tend to be a little bit more pensive. I want to think about it. What are we doing here? She sees me. She thinks I'm lazy, apathetic, uncaring. I see her. I think she's reckless, impulsive, and going to kill us all. But because we're modern professionals, so when I think of intercultural communication, understand that we have differences even within group that often get us into trouble. So when we think about diversity training, understand that there's a panorama. If you're bringing someone in, be sure that you have some idea of what they're doing, and don't be afraid to order up and tell them what you need and what some of the issues are. The other thing is understanding, are we talking about a multicultural audience or a culturally specific audience? Are we dealing with child welfare? Is the training going to talk about child welfare, or will it be more general? Will it be differentiated by staffing levels, and will it involve a consumer perspective? Now, I want to talk a little bit about leadership and how we begin to get stronger and where we all need to grow. One of the things around enhancing cultural competence, around awareness, is valuing diversity and respecting cultural differences. I would encourage you, wherever you are, to try to find ways to attend the Cinco de Mayo festivals, Asian New Year festivals, MLK events, local regional powwows, Women's Day events, disability events, gay pride events, just so that we begin to kind of break down our biases, our reticence to do such things. As we go to the powwows, as we go to the Asian New Year festivals, as we go to the MLK events, you don't want to just taste the food, listen to the music, watch the dances, things like that. But you want to also watch how people greet each other, what people say to each other. You also want to build your Rolodex. And you want to go like you've been there before. So try not to take the mini cam and take pictures and stuff like that. Try to be somewhat cool. Another way that we enhance our self-awareness is engaging in a sense of self-assessment, understanding where we are okay, where we need to grow, where we're strong, and where we're not so strong. Managing the dynamics of difference, understanding that there are going to be times when you put your best foot forward, as I said earlier, and people are going to kick you to the curb, so to speak. And quite frankly, if any of you wear a badge for a living, you are the man, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, and it may not have been a child welfare worker that trashed him before. It could have been an educator. It could have been a mental health worker. It could have been a local clinic. You show up with a badge, you are the man. And so the interesting thing about working cross-culturally is the notion of relationship, building relationships. For many of us who work in systems, and we think of how our systems work, we do many things to avoid and thwart a relationship. For example, working in healthcare now, we ask some questions in our first encounter with people that are very, very rude. Are you working? Do you have insurance? Your health history, your medical history, drug and alcohol history, criminal history, sexual history. Now, something I want you to do, not today. I want you to think about relationship. Don't do it today, or even tomorrow for that matter. But when you get back home, I want you to walk up to a stranger and ask them some questions. I want you to ask them how much money they make. Do they have insurance? Ask them about their health history, their medical history, their drug and alcohol history, their criminal history, their sexual history. Now here's the deal. Here's the deal. If they begin to answer, you walk away. No. I'm not kidding on this one. If they answer, walk away. Run away. These are not questions that we ask in a polite conversation, and certainly we don't answer in polite conversation, right? But in the dyad of professional, of consumer, when our families don't answer, we check that upper right-hand box, non-compliant, resistant, going to be a problem type thing. I just say that to say that one of the things that we do is we have to ask some very personal questions on the first date. In public health, we do this thing called the BRFIS, Behavior Risk Factor Surveillance System, where we call up people and we ask them, do you use your seatbelts? Do you use car seats? Do you drink in moderation? Do you not smoke? Then we ask some real interesting questions about sex, where they're kind of really gross. Well, not gross. I guess I'm in health, so they're scientific. But we ask about people, do you have violence during sex? And some other really, to me, gross sex questions. What we were finding was then we could ask many of the questions. When we got to the sex questions, people would hang up, right? Because they were kind of like, they're not appropriate to ask across gender, across age, across anything. We found that after doing some focus groups with consumers, that we could ask the questions if we explained them. If we explained the fact that we weren't raised by wolves, we know these questions are inappropriate, but answers to these questions will save lives for people. I say that to say that when we have to ask that personal question, and when we have to get in someone's business, and sometimes we do, let's have a little preface, a little explanation up front that we're not just being intrusive, we're not just being gross, we're not just being barbaric, but we need to know. The other thing that we need to know about our awareness is recognizing the limits of one's expertise. One of the things that I found to be really impressive to family members, consumers, and even other professionals is to wonder with them and own up to them, I don't understand this, can you explain it to me? Particularly family members. Becomes very, very important. And ultimately, when we think of awareness, is making sure that we learn to adapt in terms of our attitude, practice, policies, and structures. Our knowledge, finding credible services and relevant treatment models for the families that we work with. If we have to broker them somewhere, making sure that they're going to be appropriate. One of the things that we find to be really problematic is I talk about establishing a relationship and almost make it sound like it's easy. But once we get that relationship established, if we have to broker them to an agency or a system that is inappropriate or insensitive, we may lose our relationship. If we have to send them down the road to a mean agency that trashes them, not only will they resist or resent that mean agency, but they tend to resent us. And that gave rise to the intensive case management models where you begin to warn them that I'm sending you down the road to agency A, they're knuckleheads, don't take it personal, they diss everybody, that's what they do. I just say that to say that we need to begin to find other approaches and perhaps other models and give life to services that might be more impressive and sensitive to the people that we send. And certainly prepare them for when it isn't going to be that way. Ecological stressors. Understanding that families have many things impacting their lives and you may not be the only issue. And mental health as a practitioner, years ago, client comes in, we say to the client, how do you feel? And the client says, cold and hungry. And the therapist says, how does that make you feel? Client says, cold and hungry. A good therapist says, go with that a bit. Good client says, cold, hungry. In mental health, we found that if we wanted people to play the mental health game, in many cases, we had to play the cold and hunger game. I say that to say if you have a child who's being abused or families facing abuse or families facing drug issues, families facing poverty, families not eating, families cold and hungry, what you have to offer may pale in comparison to what they really, really need. In the 80s, we saw this notion of continuums of care being unfolded, recognizing that families often had multiple needs. When we think of child welfare and systems of care, continuums of care, in many cases, we want to make sure that we are supporting that family or ensconcing that family in a network of services that don't only meet the child welfare needs, but may meet other needs that are really theirs. We found out if a family was poor, not eating, that they weren't going to take our medication. We found if a family was being abused, that they weren't going to pay attention to the interventions we designed. I say that to say that in many communities where there may be crime, there may be unemployment, there may be drugs and alcohol, there may be intergroup conflict, what we have to offer may pale in comparison to what they need. So become aware of what are some of the stressors in that community and how they. One of the things I often suggest to people is look at census data, a real good place to start. Not just the numbers of people, but how they live. Such mundane things as bathroom per household, infant mortality, life expectancy. So some of us who may be working in gang-impacted areas where kids are dying early, one of the things we see is often kids give up. And you say, you know, if you keep living that life, if you keep taking that drugs, if you keep participating in gang, you may not live to be 18. And the kid says, I don't expect to live to be 15. Things of that nature. So understand when we look at communities that they're diverse and their ability to sustain life are going to vary by community. And again, part of your leadership becomes in being an advocate for such things as job creation, for such things as better educational services or after-school resources, for such things as parenting classes, things of that nature. And I'm talking to the traditional parenting classes either. Become aware of cultural assets and resiliencies that promote empowerment. What's good in this family and what can we build on? Ways in which families are not doing so well. Ways in which families are faulty are often evident. What isn't always evident is how they're strong. Give you an example. I remember my dad always told us as children, you shouldn't have your kids until you can afford them. You shouldn't have children out of wedlock, and if you ever have a child out of wedlock, we're going to be disowned and what have you, and blah, blah, blah. I was the middle child of two sisters, and my oldest sister, as a senior in high school, had a child. She got pregnant. And I remember when we found out, me and my little sister were saying, well, can we have your quilt? Can we have your pillows? Because we figured she was gone. The bad thing that happened, or the good thing that happened, was my dad, who was a serious disciplinarian, became a grandfather, right? And so he was worthless at that point. I mean, it was like there were no more rules. And we're like, you know, you make these rules, we live by them. She messes up, you keep her. We don't get her quilt, we don't get her pillow. What's going on? And I went away to school as my sister went back to high school to finish, and I got my first degree. My sister got her high school diploma. I went to graduate school. My sister went to a 4-year school and got a little degree, and I went and got my PhD, and she got her 4-year degree, and then she went and got her master's degree, and then she went and got another master's degree, and then she went and got married, and she married someone really sharp, and she had all 3 of her kids, and she had her kids before she was 30. All 3 of her kids graduated from University of Maryland. They do real well. I had my first kid when I was 32. My kid's gonna be with me for the rest of my damn life. My sister and them live very well. I hate her. I say that to say that it's so easy to write people off so early and not know. What I knew then and what I knew now, I shouldn't have listened to my dad. If I had to do it over again, I'd have my kids at 14. I was never able to afford them, so just waiting wasn't the answer either. So I say this, that often we throw people under the bus very prematurely and not know what they're really capable of. My sister lives down the road in Silver Spring. Wonderful lady. I'm married to a wonderful guy. They do wonderfully well. I'm still struggling. I'm okay, though. I'm okay. The other thing that we need to be aware of is our organization, particularly if we work for an organization, how it's perceived by the communities, and what is our legacy and what is our future. In terms of our skills, we need to ongoing pursuit of developmental and training experience to improve our cultural competence, continue to do that, use competencies to promote and build upon healthy behaviors, community resiliencies, and culture-based assets, and develop techniques that help ourselves and our organizations become non-oppressive entities, so that we aren't only okay with groups of color, we aren't only okay with women, but that we become actually effective with people with disabilities, gays and lesbians, so forth. That we aren't only good with our urban folks and not so good with our non-urban folks, but that we can cover the waterfront in particular. Now, when we think of diversity, one of the things I've been kind of plagued by is that we've mushed all the groups together, and I want to kind of begin to help us understand who we're working with. To help you answer that first question, who are you working with? We have ethnocultural groups. That's a scientific term for just looking at groups of color. And who you see I have here are Black or African Americans, Hispanic or Latino Americans, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native American and American natives, bi or multiracial, understanding that as a country we're seeing more bi or multiracial kids than ever before. In fact, I live in the Great Northwest, where we interracially marry for whatever reason 3 to 4 times the national average. Go figure. And also, including this group, are European groups, are whites. What's interesting about these groups, I remember years ago when we were working at the National Center to develop Cultural Competence Monograph, a bunch of deep people sitting around a table wondering, is it Black or African American, is it Latino or Hispanic? And these are all PhDs, MDs, PsyDs, EdDs, Ds all over the place. And this went around for about 14 hours. I mean, first day all day, next day half the day. And then at one point, one of the people who were taking notes, one of the administrative support folks says, dang, why don't you just call people what they want to be called? And we all kind of looked at her like, how dare she? Because she has no D at all. And what we ended up doing was calling people what they want to be called. Now, what's interesting about that is I'm old enough that when I was born, I started off life as a little colored boy, turned into a Negro, became Black, Afro-American, and most recently African-American. I tell people, if you look at me long enough, I'll change right in front of your eyes. But I say we want to refer to people how they want to be called. And the reason I say that is because I'm African-American, no problem. My grandma, were she alive, had trouble transitioning from Negro to Black. She couldn't go to Africa. The reason she couldn't deal with Africa was because all she knew about Africa was Tarzan, and that wasn't her shtick, right? I've been there, I've taught there, researched there. It's a big part of me. I like what I am. Now, calling me African American, we got it going on. Life is good. Calling my grandmother African American, life is not so good for you, and I'm betting on grandma. I say that to say we need to get accustomed to asking people how they refer to their ethnicity, even when they appear white. A lot of my white friends will call themselves white. They will call themselves Caucasian, even though they may not hail from the Caucasus Mountains. They will call themselves Anglo, even though they have no Anglican roots. This whole thing is a mess. It's not scientific, it's sociological. And if you look at the genome study that's taking place over the last few years, who's related to who is a mess as well. So again, just because we are doesn't mean we are. I will absolutely suggest that there are sociological consequences to race, but it's a biological construct. It just doesn't work. But become comfortable with using the terms and become comfortable with asking people. Because what you will find in one family, one person will be Hispanic and a sister or brother will be Latino, and they mean it. The other thing that's going to happen is that in the 2010 census, we will get another group expanded. The Asian American Pacific Islander category will get split into two groups in 2010. In 2000 census, Hispanic or Latinos, which were formerly a group of color, became an ethnic group. So understand that these terms are also very dynamic. They change. So again, when we think of cultural competence, I mentioned earlier, you don't get fixed. What you do is you get on the bandwagon. You start to learn. And just when you learn a group, they go and change on you. I'll talk about that as we move forward. There's some other dimensions of diversity that are going to concern you, which are called non-ethnic cultural groups. Women, LGBTQs, lesbian, gays, bisexuals, transgender, questioning, twin-spirited, intersex, the whole bit. People with disabilities, seniors, people in poverty, people who are homeless, religious minorities are all members of non-ethnic cultural groups. Refugees and immigrants are also people that you're going to concern yourself with. And when we think of refugees and immigrants, the simple way of distinguishing them is refugees come here for survival, immigrants for opportunity. Then the issue of being documented versus undocumented. Anyone ever heard the term, it's a negative term, WAP? Anybody know what it refers to? We think it's Italians, but it actually refers to, it's an acronym. It means without papers. These were our first undocumented, our first illegal aliens, however you want to phrase it, and these were largely people of European descent. What's interesting about our European migration and European ethnicity, the first major wave came between 1880 and 1900, which were Western and Northern Europeans who got trashed big time when they got here by the Europeans who preceded them. The second major wave came between 1920 and about 1928, which were Southern and Eastern Europeans who got trashed big time by the Europeans that preceded them. What's interesting, today we would look at these folks as primarily white. That's how they would look to most of us. But on site, they could see the ethnic differences. What's interesting, you can still see it in parts of the Northeast, parts of the Midwest, and there are probably other parts where Europeans form enclaves or communities for their survival. So if you spend time in Boston, you can find an Italian community, an Irish community, a Greek community. Spend time in Cincinnati, you can find a German community, a Polish community, and they mean it. As a parent of a diverse child, a parent of an ethnic child, when that kid went out to play, he said, don't do that song, don't eat that food, don't wear those clothes, because you'll give us away. I say that to say is that we have a real strange history around immigrant status, and for a lot of us as whites, our ethnicity was kind of beaten out of us for our survival. I think it's a negative consequence. One of the interesting things that we see happening on college campuses around the country now is a revival of understanding white culture, who we are, where we come from, why we became white and weren't allowed to remain ethnic. I say that just to say that when we go back to the cold exercise, what that cold remedy probably was something that was handed down intergenerationally, and it probably has some reflection on your real true diversity. It's something we haven't dealt with as well as a nation. I will also suggest to you that in the 21st century, what does the concept black or white or mean without looking at other factors? For example, cultural identity. As I stand before you, racially, you know that I'm of African descent, that I'm black. I mean, that should be kind of something you can kind of tell, if you're a diversity person. Culturally, you have no idea who I am. And you can't walk up, well, you can, don't do this, but you really don't want to walk up to me and say, yo, James, how black are you? That's not a smooth way of doing that. So if you're working with diverse people, that's something you can't really do. How Latino are you? How white are you? But you know what you can begin to do? You can wonder who they are in terms of questions you can ask on the first encounter. What type of music do you like? What type of food do you eat? What type of holidays do you celebrate? So if I tell you I'm big into Tom Jones, really big into Engelbert Humperdinck, and I'm so glad Lawrence Welk still comes on, you probably wouldn't, or you shouldn't laugh, but I'm okay. But it gives you some idea who we're working with. And what I'm suggesting is that in the 21st century, often what we see is in what we get. And we don't want to presume by looking at someone that they are into this type of food, into this type of politics, into this type of religion. We're a mess as a result. But it's also important to kind of pay attention to culture because people often value it. I'll give you an example. One of the secretaries I had for about 10 years, we're having lunch one day, and she looks up, Lisa, she looked up at me and said, you know what, James, I didn't even notice that you were black. I'm like, whoa. I said, that's kind of okay. I said, because I didn't even notice that you were a woman. And I did notice that she was a woman because I'm a social worker. But she was hurt, and because she was proud to be a woman, and she was, and I said, Lisa, I don't think you really meant that you didn't notice that I was black because you've known me 10 years, and come on now. And you see my kids, and they're black too, so it's not like, and so I really am. And her being proud of her womanness is also reflects that I'm proud of being an African American. So not seeing someone in their totality really doesn't benefit them. It's not really what I think she really meant to say was, James, I see your humanity. So again, I'll go back to something I said earlier. We haven't even learned how to talk to each other at dealing with diversity. And one of the things I've learned to do in dealing with diverse people, or people generally, bless you, is apologize up front. If I offend you, if I dish you, that's my dumbness, not my meanness. And quite frankly, the more you work cross-culturally, the likelihood of making mistakes is evident. Having taught this subject for years, what I remember was, in schools of social work, about 75% female, 25% male. Males typically aren't used to being so outnumbered by their female peers. Invariably, some guy says something about them, except they're in the room, and even a room this size, you can literally feel it heat up, right? You see a bunch of red faces, and you say, boy, is he in trouble, and you want to reach over and save the poor guy, say, nope, he's on his own. And first break, what happens is someone walks up to him and goes up one side and down the other, and he has this kind of deer in headlights look, and all he's learned is don't say that again around them, and doesn't speak for the rest of the class, right? So we made a rule in my classroom that if someone says something that's gross or inappropriate, that don't go up to them and rip them a new one. Try to respect their intent. They're a social worker. They're probably not into this to make a whole bunch of money. They're probably not mean or evil people. They just don't know. So give them a break and take them aside and not embarrass him or her and say this might be a better way of dealing with this subject. Now I said some of us are older. Some of us have been dealing with these terms for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, so you might need to correct this person a second time or third time. Now we said if you're correcting them for the fourth time for the same offense, all bets are off. Then we drag them to the parking lot and beat them to win of their life, right? But quite frankly, what we want to do is give people the benefit of the doubt. An example of that, I did a presentation years and years and years and years ago for a senior group, and you know when you leave, those of you who speak publicly, you say, any questions? And you really don't want any questions. It's just a perfunctory thing, right? So no one's really supposed to raise their hand. And so a hand goes up, and a lady pulls her hand down. Hand goes up, another lady pulls her hand down. Hand goes up, another lady pulls her hand down. I said, do you have a question? She says, yes. And the lady said, no, she doesn't. I said, do you really have a question? She says, yes. And the friend says, but you don't want to hear it. I said, I think I want to hear it. It was this is in Oregon, so it was an all-white audience. And this is a first-generation Italian lady had lived in the East Coast and just recently moved to Oregon, and she had a real important question. And the question was, is it okay to call you people the N-word? Now, she didn't say the N-word. She actually said the N-word. And I thought it was kind of funny. And everybody turned red, of course. Oh, hush over the audience. And my response to her was absolutely legitimate. Yes, if you run fast enough. Now, she's 75 years old, didn't stand a chance. Now, the question was absolutely legitimate. She was first generation, had lived in an enclave all her life, and had heard the word, didn't know it was okay, didn't know that she wasn't supposed to say it, the whole bit. Again, when we think of who we are and all we have to accomplish, one of the things that we need to begin to understand is intent and impact. Did I intend to offend? No. If I did, I apologize, and at some point, I'm not going to take a whole bunch more abuse. Now, at the same time, I have to make a pact with myself for not making that mistake again. I'll offend you in another way next time. Right? I'll get you some other way next time. So as we think about these differences, let's understand that we weren't really prepared for them. Be prepared to make a mistake. Socioeconomic status is also important. I'm at least second or third generation college. Dad went to SC, mom went to UCLA. I was going to college or he was killing me. Not all of our families will be first generation college or no generation college. Let's understand that that's an issue. When we think of SES, socioeconomic status, it's income, education, and occupation. What does that mean? Nationality is also something that's going to be critical. If you are working with refugee groups such as Cambodian, Somali, Ethiopian, other parts of the world, they may not understand that they are Asian. They may have just thought that they were Cambodian. They may not have thought they were of African descent. They thought they were just Somali. So they may not play these food group games the way that we do. Understanding that also nationality might be a greater source of pride than the racial category that we tend to separate people into. And also understand that 1 + 1 won't always be 2. And what I mean by that is you can leave two people from the same racial group together, but of different nationalities together, and you come back and there's only one person standing. So if you work in parts of South Florida, or parts of New York, or parts of Southern California, I just say that 1 + 1, just because one is doesn't mean one is. Just want to be careful. Language and communication style. Undoubtedly, we need to become more sophisticated around different languages, but also sophisticated around how people talk. I asked my youngest the other day what he was doing on the weekend, and he told me him and his boys are going to be posted around the crib. They're watching out for 12. They might go look for some chickens later on that day. I live in the city. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And I walked away. I hadn't had a clue as to what he said. I say, as we talk to young people and as they use language that's funny and different to us, if I had been smart, I would ask him what he meant. It's called ethnographic interviewing, that when people use language that we don't get, slow the world down and wonder who they are. For example, when I still try to play basketball with the young fellas, what I can't say to them is, please refrain from elbowing me. I'm becoming rather perturbed. That does not work in any urban gym in America. So when we think about language, there's an opportunity for us to try to stay young and stay abreast of language by talking to our young people, our families, and so forth. So as we hear it, don't let it sail over our head. Wonder about it. Family constellation. What does this mean? How families are different. Is it a biological family? Is it an intergenerational family? Is it a single-parent family? Let's don't pathologize it too prematurely. Understanding the social history of who we're working with, how they get to the area. Do they come as immigrants or refugees? Do they come as laborers? Sexual orientation is also a critical area of difference. Generational status, what it means to be first-generation American, what it means to be first-generation urban, what it means to be born in the 60s versus born in the 40s. Also makes us different. Health beliefs, time orientation. Anybody ever heard of CP time? I'm barbecuing today at 4 o'clock. What time are you guys coming? 6, right on time. Right on time. Right on time. If you show up at 4, the meat isn't thawed, the grill isn't lit, we're not dressed, what the hell are you doing here? So a lot of us know that informally, time can be bent. By the same token, the same people that just said 6 o'clock, if I give them a 4 o'clock job interview, they know to show up at a 3:45. What we're going to find is that in many cases, our families, if we give them a 4 o'clock, they'll show up at a, 4:15, 4:30, quarter, and with, no shame in their game as a result. And in mental health, we used to be the most notorious, I think, when someone showed up late. Someone shows up at 10:15. I mean, we're like undone. We really can't do anything with this. It's like, and what we found is that in many cases, it's a perfect opportunity to help people understand how time works in our culture, right? In professional culture. They didn't mean to diss us, they just didn't know. You didn't mean to diss me by showing up at 6. You got there when it was comfortable. So when people do show up late, let's wonder with them, do you understand how we work? Do you have trouble planning? Do you have trouble with childcare, trouble with transportation? Is there somewhere I can help you? Like I said, in mental health, we have the history of you showing up late, we just send you away for next week knowing that your problems could be seriously compounded. So something as mundane as common as time can also be very, very cultural. This also has implication in how we intervene. If we have intervention that's going to be 6 months to 18 months before we expect real serious progress, we might need to explain that to our family and also build in milestones where we can have a party. Often you work with task groups and they want to fix the world, right? They want to solve poverty. They want to end environmental pollution. They want to end discrimination. They want to fix the world. And I say, you know, probably what we should start with is let's clean the front room. Fixing the world is a noble goal. It's a very monumental goal. We may not get there anytime soon. If we don't build in some milestones, if we don't find time to celebrate, time to have a party, folks that are delay time orientations, folks that are CP time. And CP time is, as I found out, I thought it was colored people black time, is Latino time, Native time, Asian time. My New York friends call it Jewish Standard Time. It's rural time. It's across the board. You see it universally. But helping people understand that time isn't always ordered by the clock. Classic example for me is I live across the street from my mom's best friend, Miss Shirley. Miss Shirley is older. She's an elder in the community. She had 3 sons. She taught my oldest to ride a big wheel. I have no idea how. Miss Shirley's about 4'1", about 200 pounds, nicest lady you ever met in your life. She knows everybody's business, but she's my mom's best friend. Miss Shirley doesn't have a car. I'm late for work. Miss Shirley has to go to Safeway, has to go to the grocery store. And she will call me up 15 minutes before my job. James, can you take me to the store and bring me back home? No, Miss Shirley, I'm late. Okay, that's fine. Can you just take me to the store and bring me back home, though? No, Miss Shirley, I'm going to be late for work. Okay, I'll be waiting on my porch, so just come and get me when it's time to go. Miss Shirley, I'm late. My boss is mad at me. I'm always late. I can't be late today. Well, I just won't be there long. Just take me and bring me back. Well, I've learned to park my car by my other door. I go out the other door so Miss Shirley doesn't see me leave. I get a phone call at work, 1 from her, 2 from my mom. Shirley says, I'm waiting on the porch. My mom says, why didn't you take her to the store? I'm moving. Because in my culture, Miss Shirley's an elder. I'm beholding. She's my mom's friend. She's my play mom. She owns me. She doesn't care about PhD. She doesn't care about boss. She doesn't care about job. I have a car and she doesn't, and that's all that matters. We're moving. I say that to say that time for some people isn't as important as a personal interaction. And we might want to begin to watch how that works. Culturally, it's inappropriate for me to diss Miss Shirley to be at work on time. I'm supposed to take her and bring her back, and then diss my boss. Like I said, I don't have a spine, so I'm not that tough yet. I'm really looking forward to stem cell research. I need a spine at some point in my life. Time orientation is an important factor in looking at diversity. Age and life cycle. Again, what it means to be a parent of a 16-year-old parent of a 2-year-old versus a 32-year-old parent of a 2-year-old. And typically how we in our culture tend to see as gross the young teen parent and see as normal this 32-year-old parent of a 2-year-old. Let's make it a 2-parent family. Let's make it good. The problem can be that we may not see is that this 2-parent family, both parents are working 60 hours a week. In this female teenage-headed household, this child may be also being reared by a brother, a sibling, a father, an uncle, maybe just having a very supremely powerful social network. We've learned to pathologize this one and give this one a free pass. And we've seen such tragedies as the thing at Virginia Tech a few years ago. We've seen the Columbine thing. We put metal detectors in these communities where we expect pathology to occur as a result of young parents. And we tend not to where we find parents as normative. I just think we need to develop new measures as what becomes normative. And so when we think of age and life cycle, let's don't fall into the trap of thinking that a young parent is inherently deficient and an older parent is inherently good. Spatial patterns just refers to urban-rural differences, gender and sexuality, physicality, in terms of what we look like still matters a lot to people. We still are grossed out by certain folks based upon what they look. We know that we don't hire people that are heavy. We don't hire people that we don't view as attractive, things of that nature. And lastly on this list, even though there are many more dimensions of diversity when we think about people, is religion and spirituality. Understand that that may often provide a great source of strength, resiliency for people that we often overlook. So when we think of systems of care, for example, continuums of care, for example, two areas that I've often seen overlooked that I find to be quite important. One is the spiritual piece, and I'm not pushing religion at all. I'm not pushing that at all. I'm just saying that if it's there, don't dismiss it. And the other has to do with socialization and recreation for young people and for family members. So I'm big into notions of respite for foster or adoptive homes, even though it's kind of a luxury and it probably won't happen. It's a Cadillac, something we need to kind of think about for the future. But how do we make sure that we don't burn foster or adoptive parents out? Natural networks of support. I don't want you to think that you have to do this alone. In many communities, there exists a lot of support, a lot of guidance, a lot of leadership. For example, when I say merchants and business people, I'm speaking largely about mom and pop stores, not so much the chain stores, but the local mom and pop stores. Like many of us have those in our community, the convenience stores that are mom and pop owned. The way that you can typically tell them is that Bayer aspirin is from 1983. Another way of thinking about this, particularly for males, are the barbershops. If you're trying to identify men resources in your community, that can be mentors or fosters or what have you, don't be afraid about going to the barbershop. If you don't think men gossip, go hang out at the barbershop. Also, I would suggest salons and the more cooler ways of talking about where you get your hair did and all that kind of stuff. Unheralded leaders and community elders. Miss Shirley in my neighborhood is an adoptive foster parent. She's had 3 biological children and finds a way to always be a foster parent. And by virtue of being across the street from me, I always got foster kids because she still is very active as a I don't know, 60, 70-year-old. So she'll go to the beach for a weekend and give us, I thought I was rid of my kids, so I got 2 or 3 more on occasion. But community elders and unheralded leaders, faith-based institutions. And I'm speaking the church, the mosque, the temple, the synagogue, the sweat lodge across the board. We want them on our Rolodex as key informants, and as perhaps places where we might go find solace. Ethnic media personalities. In particular, if you're working with Latinos, really look at the novellas, really look at the soap operas as possible times to get messages out. The other thing is that print media, historically a resource in the African American community, is becoming a force in other ethnic communities as well. Advocacy organizations, urban leagues, LULACs, tribal organizations, groups that work with kids with disabilities and things of that nature. Make sure that they know of your work and what you're doing, your mission. Collateral agencies, social networks. Here I'm talking about the animal clubs like the Moose, the Elks, and things of that nature, Rotarians. They often, and this would also include Greeks, such as fraternities and sororities. They can play a role. And certainly consumer and family member organizations. Now, when we think of this, bear in mind that cultural competence leadership involves a journey and not a destination. You don't get fixed. For example, if we got steeped in the women's movement in the 60s and the 70s, and we haven't paid attention since then, just empowering our female friends to go out and burn their bras isn't really going to impress them. That's way too passé, and they're way too expensive. There are new ways of demonstrating. Another thing that we find to be important is that apologizing isn't always the answer. So, for example, we know that women on average, not necessarily you, but women on average make 67 cents on the dollar for men for the same job, same education, so forth. As men, I'm going to take the liberty of speaking for the men in the room, to the women in the room. Women, we are sorry. Is that better? I've been doing this for a while, man. Watch this. Women, we are real sorry. Is that better? No. No, you went to 33 cents, not like the others. Yeah. So as a guy, the interesting thing, if I'm not fighting for your 33 cents, then by default, I play a role in your oppression. So in many cases, saying sorry makes me feel better as an individual. It shows my humanity, my contrition. It may not feed the bulldog, so to speak. So when we think of cultural competence and how we move and how we grow in this area, staying abreast and learning to go beyond sorry to actually intervening, throwing rocks at that glass ceiling, making sure that linguistic resources exist for people that have linguistic differences, things of that nature. So cultural competence is an active, developmental, and ongoing process that is aspirational rather than achieved. It requires an awareness of our own beliefs and values and biases. We all have those. Knowledge of and the worldview of diverse clients and communities. How do they order their world? What do they think? And ultimately, skills, strategies, and techniques consistent with real-life experiences and the context of diverse communities and what have you. I'm going to stop on this notion. Years ago, friends of mine were working in Brooklyn, and he was a very attractive, charismatic African-American psychologist. She was a very attractive, charismatic, insightful Puerto Rican psychologist. They went to work in a part of Brooklyn that was black and Latino, and they really looked the part. They were there to deal with issues affecting children's mental health. They had an open house, no one came. They finally talked to elders in the community, and elders said, we're not so concerned about mental health, even though that may be an issue. What we're concerned about are drug-affected infants, infants born drug-impacted. And if you want to help us, if you want us to play with you, you are new to our community, you help us in areas that we find important. I say that to say that we thought that just finding people that look like the community to serve the community was going to be the answer. What we found is that even though we looked like the community, if we weren't listening to what they were saying, we missed them entirely. So when we think of cultural competence, when we think of diversity, who can do this work will surprise you. I didn't say this about most of my students. Most of my students are white. Most of them want to do diversity work. In most cases, when they apply for diversity-type positions, people look at them and dismiss them. My students of color, who some want to do diversity work, some want to do more generic work, are often by default lured into these diversity positions just because they look the part. Okay? So again, when I say to you, just because one is doesn't mean one is, I'm absolutely sincere with respect to that. I would suggest to you that we have a lot of work to do if we're going to move effectively in the 21st century and eliminate disparities. We have a lot of work to do when we begin to see the number of children that are not in families, that aren't being loved. And one of the things that I was really impressed with in hearing the mom speak this morning and watching the video, which I really, really loved, was it reminded me the importance of unconditional love. With unconditional love, we will try things that we wouldn't ordinarily do. I was very, very fortunate having a mother and a father that loved me to no end. I didn't know that growing up. But growing up, what I realized was that I could make a mistake and come home and get Band-Aids and Bactine. I could make a mistake and come home and get hugs and get love. When we have families and children where that doesn't occur, we're really at risk. The work you do is tremendously important, not only for the kids you serve, but for this nation. I see you as leaders, whether you see yourself as leaders. And I'm hoping that you learned a little bit from me today, that you pick up some of this and run with it, that you become pioneers, you become leaders, that you become experts in your part of the country and help make the world better for all of us. Again, I want to thank the center for inviting me. I want to thank the staff for always being so gracious and so supportive. I want to thank you for being a very attentive audience this early in the morning. I got to get back to Oregon. They miss me. Thank you very much.